Eve a charge, agus sé war géad fáilte an seo go Cranfield. Hello everyone, and you're very welcome here to the townland of Cranfield on the north shore of Loch Ness, 3 miles from Randalstown in County Antrim. The name Cranfield is a corruption of Cranfield, the wood of wild garlic. And wild garlic was a herb which grew profusely around here in bygone years.
Though not as strong as the usual garlic we use to cook, it nevertheless has a distinctive pungent smell.
Historically, Cranfield belonged to the heavily wooded district of Nafiwi or Nafiva, which ran along the north shore of Loch Ness from the Blackrock to Toome. In pre-plantation times, this territory belonged to Clan Iwi, the O'Neills of Clandyboy, who ruled a large district in southwest and mid-Antrim. And previous to that, the Fiva belonged to the ancient Irish district of Dalnary.
Historically, Cranfield was a parish in its own right, containing the 4 towns Tamvilla, Ballynarny, Ballyarvine and Ballykeel, the town of the church in which we are now standing.
This part of the townland of Cranfield is an ancient ecclesiastical site containing the ancient holy well of St Alcan and the church of Cranfield. This well, beside which I'm standing, is one of many wells throughout Ireland which were places of worship in pre-Christian times. Certain wells, trees, mounds, etc. were held to be sacred by the Druids, and they were subsequently blessed by figures in the early Irish church. In this case by St Alcan, who has associations with Armoy, or perhaps by a lesser known saint, St Ernan.
Cranfield became part of a network of early Christian settlements on the north shore of Loch Ness, including the monastic site at Antrim with its round tower, churches at Kells, Drumall at present-day Randalstown, Dunedin, and sites at the 3 islands outside Toome and Church Island in Loch Beg. The water of the well is believed to provide healing. The most famous instance of healing relates to a boy who was brought to Cranfield from Newcastle upon Tyne in the early years of the 1900s and was cured of his blindness. The process for healing involves bathing the affected part of the body with a rag dipped in the water of the well. The rag is then tied to the overhanging tree, and as can be seen, many people still visit the well in search of a cure.
St Alcan's well is also remarkable for the small amber stones, or Cranfield stones, which can be fished from deep in the well. Anyone wishing to obtain these stones should exercise great care, as the well is quite deep.
Traditionally, these stones were much valued. When swallowed or carried on board fishing boats, they were a protection against drowning. They protected a house against fire, a woman at childbirth, and were much prized by immigrants heading for America.
St Ulcan's feast day falls on the 29th of June, and this was the occasion each year for hundreds of people to descend on Cranfield to carry out the pilgrimage or stations to St Ulcan, and we will hear more about the stations later.
At the entrance to the well is a large stone known as St Ulcan's Bed. In common with many such stones throughout Ireland, there was a tradition of people seeking a cure through lying on this bed. Now we progress towards Cranfield Church. It has its origins, it is believed, in the 13th century, at least 700 years after the era of St Ulcan. This was a period when the Christian Church in Ireland was undergoing reforms, inspired by new orders of monks who arrived from Europe after the Norman invasion. One obvious question which arises is, was there a continuous ecclesiastical presence in this spot in the intervening 700 years? Archaeologists from Queen's University in Belfast have recently identified this area of the graveyard boundary as part of an enclosure predating the church, suggesting the existence of a rath from medieval times, which might well have housed a settlement from the time of St Ulcan, and definitely predating the church. We enter the graveyard by the stone steps used by thousands of pilgrims throughout the ages, and now we have a better view of Cranfield Church. References to Cranfield Church in historical sources. The first we know of is in the taxation of Pope Nicholas I in the year 1290. In the era of the Protestant Reformation in the 5th, 16th and 17th century, the Irish Church suffered severe persecution. Like most of these old churches in Ireland, Cranfield did not survive long after the defeat of the Irish under Hugh O'Neill at Kinsale in 1601. And in fact, by the year 1662, we read in the Visitation Book that the Cranfield Church is decayed. As we have said, the present townland of Cranfield was historically a parish in its own right, with 4 towns within it, one of which was Ballinakilla, or Churchtown, where we now stand. These 4 townlands most likely made up the Erenach lands of the church. These lands were associated with the church, but were managed by a local Erenach family, generations of which occupied the lands in return for performing certain duties and providing payments. Incidentally, there is some evidence to suggest that the McLarnon family may have been the Erenach family for Cranfield. One can imagine the attraction of Cranfield as a site for an ecclesiastical settlement. It would have easy access to Antrim and other ecclesiastical sites by boat, and the loch would have provided plentiful fish. Its remote location in the woods of the Fiva would have endeared it to the monks of the early Irish Church, who had a great affinity with the beauty of nature as part of God's creation. One reminder of these forgotten Erenach lands is the Turbine Cross beside Creggan football pitch, which for hundreds of years has marked the boundary of the Erenach lands. Turbine comes from the Irish charman, meaning a sanctuary, and the Latin terminus, meaning boundary. We approach the church by the west gable and enter by the main door. The altar stood at the east end, in the direction of the rising sun, in front of what was a large window. At either side of the altar site, we see recesses in the wall for the storage of chalices and other objects. Here too, we see the remnants of the Turbine Cross which preceded the present one. This one was crafted by Charlie Fergus, father of the late Neil Fergus, and was erected in 1912. We also see a modern replica of a typical Turbine Cross. As we have already seen, Cranfield was a place of pilgrimage going back for hundreds and hundreds of years. The traditional form of the stations began with the pilgrim circling the church from the north side to the east, to the south and the west. This sunwise movement is known in Irish as Jeshal and had good connotations, in contrast to the opposite movement, Tuathal, which was not deemed auspicious. As they moved around, the pilgrim prayed the prayers of the Rosary, going round 7 times and dropping a stone each time they passed the door. Having completed this for 7 rounds, the pilgrim then moved to the well, where they performed similar rounds. They usually repeated the entire process 3 times, and it was not uncommon to do this on a number of consecutive days. The stations were usually performed around the feast day of St. Alcan on the 29th of June, but some accounts suggest that they could be carried out at any time from the 1st of May.
In the early 1900s, with the foundation of the Gaelic League, Conradh na Gaeilge, in 1893 and the ongoing Gaelic revival, there was a great interest in Irish heritage, and a number of large gatherings were held at Cranfield in various years on the 29th of June at Cranfield Sunday.
One of the largest gatherings was in 1911, when many hundreds of people descended on Cranfield for a mass, the stations, and an afternoon of music and dance, with bands and champion singers and dancers performing on stage. People came from all around the Loch Shore, and many from Belfast, arriving by train at Staffordstown Station and by charabancs, an early form of taxi. A new Turbine Cross, constructed by Charles Fergus, was unveiled by the leading antiquarian Francis Joseph Bigger. Turning to the graveyard itself, there are a number of interesting features. As was traditional, the northern section was reserved for newborn babies and is devoid of any headstones. It must be remembered that stone headstones were the exception rather than the rule until more recent times, and so the graveyard contains many more graves than perhaps one might assume. According to tradition, St. Alcan, the patron saint of Cranfield, is buried in the graveyard in soil brought from Rome. One of the oldest graves was that of the O'Neills of Fiva, which was at the entrance to the church, although the headstone is now missing. These O'Neills were a branch of the Gaelic O'Neills of Lower Clonewee, whose estate still exists in Randalstown. These Fiva O'Neills, representatives of an ancient Gaelic aristocracy, moved from Shane's Castle to Carlion House, also known as Fiva House, in the early 1600s. Like most of the Gaelic aristocracy, they could trace their family tree back to Niall of the Nine Hostages in the late 4th century, much longer than almost all the aristocracy of Europe, including the Windsors. We see Carlion House just off the Carmorn Road, marked on Ledrich's map of County Antrim in 1780, but it disappeared in the 19th century. The Fiva O'Neills, unlike most of the Gaelic aristocracy, were able to retain their faith and some of their wealth well into the 19th century, when the last recognised O'Neill of Carlion House, Felix Cunningham O'Neill, was buried in Creggan graveyard. This graveyard, like many of the ancient graveyards, was used by both religious traditions in the community. Names such as White, McFadden and Hume are common. One grave of note is that of Sam Finiston of Bricart House, Moneyglass, the magistrate who sentenced Roddy McCarley in Tuam in the aftermath of the 1798 rebellion, referred to as Cruel Sam in the old version of the song Roddy McCarley. There are still a number of graves with legible inscriptions from the 1700s, with people bearing Gaelic names such as Felemy, Cuolu and Una, though many of these are becoming illegible. This is a poignant reminder of the time when Irish was the language of the area. By the end of the 1700s, Irish was in steep decline in the locality. Another interesting gravestone is that of a Henry McCann, reputed to be the son of one of the three McCann brothers who came to the Fiva in the 1600s, and from whom most of the local McCanns of the Fiva are descended. Some would say that this is a man with a lot to answer for. This is the gravestone of Sarah Hannon and her husband Hugh from the 1700s. It has a skull and crossbones engraved on it, along with an ornate cross. These engravings are known as mortality symbols and were popular in some cases in the 1700s. Finally, we have an intriguing inscription on this gravestone, now barely legible, which reads, "Here lieth the body of Mabel Fondeau, died May the 23rd, 1776, of love at 104. Unfortunately, there is no local memory of who Mabel Fondeau was, or how she died of love at 104.
For anyone wishing for more information on the graves in Cranfield, this can be found on the Creggan Local Heritage site. Although the project to record as many of the grave inscriptions as possible is still incomplete. And so we come to the end of this short video on Cranfield, Cravkill. And I'm sure you'll all agree that it is a real jewel of our local heritage, and we would hope that it will be treasured and safeguarded in the years to come. Garamila Maihilgov.